there, my name is JChe and I'm a graduate student at the University of Hawaii Manoa School of Nursing and Dental Hygiene. When I speak to people about deliberate practice, a concept that I'm interested in, they often ask me, how is deliberate practice different from practice? So with that in mind, I designed a presentation that defines and details the components of deliberate practice. Let's look at two definitions of deliberate practice. They're very similar. They mostly differ because of the intent or purpose of the deliberate practice. The first one defines deliberate practice as a method that individuals utilize to achieve expertise in any domain. You think of this definition, think of Tiger Woods, the Williams sisters, Yo-Yo Ma. The second definition, a stepwise process for teaching any individual in a specific domain. And as you see there, the list shows you things really related to skills training, crew resource management, flight training, the nuclear industry, and what we see in a domain adjacent to nursing, medicine, crisis management, anesthesia, and code blue. Deliberate practice has been cultured a bit in the medical domain, mostly for the purpose of using simulation to teach medical procedures to medical students. And this particular definition is from McGahey, and I'm just going to read it real quickly here. Highly motivated learners with good concentration who address well-defined learning objectives or tasks at an appropriate level of difficulty with focused, repetitive practice that yields rigorous, reliable measurements that provide informative feedback from educational sources that promote monitoring, error correction, and more deliberate practice, evaluation and performance that may reach a mastery standard where learning time may vary, but expected minimal outcomes are identical and allows advancement to the next task or educational unit. Anders Ericsson is well known in the field of expertise research, and about a decade after he authored his first research on deliberate practice for the purpose of developing expertise, others began to incorporate this concept into simulation training. I designed this diagram to visualize the relationships of the components of deliberate practice as described by McGahey as they might look in the context of simulation. The components are described individually in the following slides, so let's see some deliberate practice in action. So let's talk about the learner a little bit. Here's Troy. He's your eager beaver. He eats a good breakfast. He shows up on time, in uniform, just like all our nursing students. Deliberate practice has been studied thus far in medical students who have a far different entry profile than nursing students do, and this is something that we need to consider as we move forward in research on deliberate practice. When using deliberate practice, it's really important that the learning objectives not only be available to the learner, but that they're clear, that they'll be well defined. This is often not the case in traditional simulation, where students enter a scenario only knowing what situation they might encounter based on where they are in the curriculum. The objective should be as specific as possible. There's really no evidence to suggest that knowing you will be performing a sub-Q injection impedes your learning associated with that task. Having clear and specific learning objectives is really complementary to the use of standardized evidence-based instruction. And this means that the facilitator isn't developing the simulation in isolation, but rather using evidence-based best practice standards. A video would be a great way to achieve this and could be made available to students 24/7 for review and more practice. It could be viewed on your iPhone right at bedside or on an iPad. And the learning objectives should really be at an appropriate level of difficulty. It's up to the facilitator to make sure that the students are being exposed to objectives that are consistent with the competencies for the year and semester that the students are in. Focused. This refers to the practice being specific in its focus, that the skill being practiced be broken down to an appropriate level of specificity. And here we see the instructor is giving the student very specific and focused feedback. Also, that the feedback that the learner is receiving while practicing is specific and focused, and it's not an opinion, and it's not ambiguous, but instead echoes the standards given to the learner at the outset. The opportunity to repeat the steps is important. Deliberate practice is the antithesis of see one, do one, teach one. Deliberate practice requires the individual to repeat the steps of the tasks individually and as part of the entire skill. It is not expected that each individual master the skills at the same rate. In fact, the opposite is true. Deliberate practice expects learning times to vary, but that the outcome will be that each individual has reached expected minimum outcomes. When each individual has reached the expected minimum outcomes, then they move on to the next task. Current practice is that everyone moves on to the next task regardless of their achievements in the previous task. See our friend there on the right with the grumbling tummy? A subcomponent of McGaughy's definition of deliberate practice says that individuals need to learn to block competing and irrelevant stimuli, like a hungry tummy or a beeping alarm. I think this is an idea that is perfectly suited to nursing because we do practice in such a distracting environment. Let's take a look back at the diagrammatic overview of the components of deliberate practice. Learners are motivated with good concentration skills. Learning objectives are well defined and known to the learner and are at an appropriate level of difficulty. The feedback the learner receives during practice is specific, immediate, and informative. The learner has time for reflection and correction and review of standards. The learner has the opportunity to repeat the task. The learner then repeats the representative task until they have reached an expected minimal outcomes with consistent success. And also that the measures by which they are being evaluated are unambiguous and based on current best practice. And finally, that the learner must be able to block out irrelevant and competing stimuli. So what do we know about deliberate practice after our overview? Well, it has been applied in multiple domains and shown to work there. In sports and music, gaming, medicine. It can be used as an independent variable, currently considered best evidence in medical education, but we also have a lot of questions left. It hasn't been used in nursing students before, and would it work with nursing students? They're not the same animal as a medical student. Once a skill is learned this way, how long does it last? What rate does that skill begin to disappear? How often would an individual need to come back and practice that skill again? And ultimately, how does this affect patient outcomes? That really should be a question on everyone's mind anytime we make a change in nursing education, is how would that carry over into practice and patients? So, things that we still need to find out. The motivational level and concentration skills of nursing students, are they compatible with deliberate practice? And really, that learning curve, that how long do the skills last once they're taught this way? And is this an effective means of teaching nursing students their psychomotor skills? So, ultimately, even if you could show that deliberate practice is an effective way to teach undergraduate nursing students, actually changing the way institutions approach the clinical time with students, simulated clinical time with students, would be the next big challenge. Thank you for your attention. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions for me, please email me at jdanders@hawaii.edu.